The garden was my sanctuary, the one place where time slowed down and the world's sharp edges softened. My hands, weathered but steady, moved through the cool earth as though tracing the contours of a long-forgotten promise. The roses I had planted years ago lifted their delicate heads toward the sun, blossoms tightly woven into shades of crimson and gentle pinks. Their silent resilience felt like an echo of who I was, patient, enduring, nurturing life even in the least inviting seasons. The light breeze carried the subtle scent of fresh soil, mingled with the distant hum of neighbors going about their day. This tranquility was mine, a pocket of peace in the suburban quiet that held every memory of my life with Jeremy. I remember how the house had once echoed with laughter, Jeremy's laughter mingling with my late husband's, filling every corner, every crack of this old home that wore decades like a soft coat. But time had quietly changed that harmony into something brittle, fragile. Now, the silence was punctuated by an unbearable tension, a presence that shadowed my every breath. That morning, dressed in the comfort of my robe and the soft slippers that had seen more years of me than even Jeremy had, I had no idea how drastically my life was about to unravel. I sat by the window, watching the sunlight play among the leaves, when the phone call arrived, a summons to a community gathering where Jeremy was to speak. I hesitated, knowing the night before had been full of odd messages hinting at something wrong. But my heart clung to hope. After all, my son was a man I had raised with faith and love. Whatever it was, surely it was not what I feared. The hall was filled with neighbors and the usual faces of our small town, but as I stepped inside, the weight in the air pressed heavy against my chest. Then Jeremy took the stage, not as the son I had nurtured, but as a man wielding words like weapons. His voice was clear, loud, undeterred by the gathering crowd. There, beneath the bright lights and the eyes of familiar faces, he declared me legally incompetent. The shock twisted in my veins, each word like a blade slicing through the fragile threads that held our past together. I felt my knees weaken, but I did not fall. Instead, a cold silence settled over me, a cruel isolation amidst the murmurs and glances exchanged like secrets behind veiled hands. The betrayal was not only in his declaration but in the way he cast me aside as if I were no longer the woman who had been everything to him. The room's atmosphere turned dense, whispers swirling in the space between us, their disbelief sharp as broken glass against my heart. Memories flooded in how I had stayed up countless nights when he was a boy, soothing fevers and fears. How I had sacrificed my own dreams, quietly setting them aside to weave a life around his. All for what? To be met with contempt and lies? The weight of the moment pressed down, a burden heavier than any physical pain. I realized then that the son I thought I knew had been replaced by a stranger driven by greed and entitlement, his love a facade carefully dismantled by ambition. The people around me watched, some with pity, others with judgment, but none spoke up on my behalf. I was left alone in that vast room, the silence louder than any accusation. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But the words were caught in my throat, choked by disbelief and sorrow. Instead, I retreated inward, feeling the cold mask of betrayal settle deeply into my bones. At home later that evening, the house felt empty in a way it never had before. The walls whispered secrets I refused to hear, and the air was thick with regret. I wandered through each room, touching the familiar surfaces as if to anchor myself to the reality I once believed in. My eyes fell on the garden outside, those resilient roses still blooming despite neglect. A quiet lesson, perhaps, that growth can emerge from the harshest winters. As the night deepened, tears threatened but did not fall. The pain was still raw, but beneath it, a seed of resolve took root. I knew the road ahead was uncertain and lonely, but something far greater than sorrow stirred inside me. The betrayal might have shattered the image of our family, but it would not erase who I was or what I was capable of. In the silence, I gathered the fragments of my dignity, holding them close against the ache. I understood, with a bittersweet clarity, that this wound was both an ending and a beginning. The man who stood before those neighbors was not the son I had raised. There would be no easy reconciliation, no quick forgiveness. But in that betrayal, I heard a faint whisper of a strength that was about to awaken, a strength born in silence, ready to fight softly but fiercely for the justice I deserved. In the days that followed, I immersed myself not in outward displays of anger or despair, but in a deep and quiet introspection. I chose silence, not the deafening silence that comes from surrender, but a thoughtful quiet that I could wield like armor. The conversation Jeremy had forced into the public domain haunted me, its echoes growing louder in the stillness of my empty rooms. Yet, instead of shouting back or collapsing under the weight of betrayal, I retreated into the sanctuary of my memories and reflections. Sitting by the window overlooking the garden, I allowed my mind to wander back through years etched with sacrifices no one ever acknowledged. Those nights when I lay awake, my own aspirations buried beneath the everyday demands of motherhood and widowhood. Dreams were framed, deferred, also that Jeremy might have a future more generous than my own past. I remembered the warmth of his small hand clasped tightly in mine as he learned to walk, the way his eyes shone when he grasped his first book, the patient little boy who trusted me with all he was and all he would become. And yet, here I was, faced with a version of my son unrecognizable. The man before me was engulfed in greed, draped in entitlement, his love substituting for manipulation and deceit. The sharp contrast between that innocent child and this calculating adult bruised something in me, a quiet ache that neither time nor tears could soothe. I thought of my late husband's enduring wisdom words that had often pierced through my darkest doubts. "Be patient, Ellie," he had said, voice steady and eyes filled with unmovable trust. Patience was not mere waiting. It was a choice to see beyond the immediate shock and pain, to find strength in measured steps rather than rash reactions. His voice lingered like a firm hand guiding me from the abyss. I clung to that mantra as if it were my last lifeline. Through endless evenings spent in contemplative silence, I wove together memories of lessons taught and values imparted. Honesty, integrity, respect for the family principles I had worked tirelessly to embed in Jeremy's heart. The bitter irony that these same values were now trampled upon by him was a cruel twist I carried with a heavy heart. Yet, I reminded myself that my past sacrifices were not erased by this moment of darkness. I began to catalog every moment, every whispered secret of family life, discerning the fissures that had crept in unnoticed. How much had I allowed silence and complacency to shield, to protect? Had the quiet avoidance of confrontation become fertile ground for deceit? The burden of this reflection did not crush me. Instead, it fueled a different resolve, a will to reclaim agency over a narrative slipping from my hands. There was power in observing quietly, in understanding deeply. I realized that I had underestimated my own resilience and capacity to respond with subtle precision rather than blaring accusation. This betrayal, as painful as it was, illuminated the path I must walk, a path one must navigate with careful steps, steely nerves, and quiet determination. Each day, I became more attuned to the nuances of Jeremy's world, the brief conversations with neighbors, the odd timing of phone calls, the carefully fabricated stories his wife Margaret whispered under the veil of concern. Their alliance, I understood, was a well-orchestrated front, carefully designed to isolate me and claim what they deemed their rightful inheritance. But they had underestimated the force of a mother's silent resolve. I began journaling again, a practice long abandoned during the whirlwind years of raising Jeremy and managing our home. Writing dipped my fingers into the pool of memory and reason, mapping out the disparities between appearance and reality. My pen traced the lines of emotional betrayal, but it also sketched the first outlines of a plan not stirred by anger, but by clarity and strength. Slowly, the emotional storm gave way to a composed stoicism. I took to walking through the neighborhood more often, observing without being observed, noting details and gathering fragments of the puzzle in quiet solitude. Questions circulated like shadows in my mind. What was their next move? What cracks in Jeremy's facade could be revealed? Where did the threads of truth intertwine with the lies? In these observations, I found a strange peace. I was no longer a passive participant in a drama scripted by others, but an active architect of my own redemption. The weight of betrayal, once suffocating, transformed into an impetus to act with precision and care. The nights were the hardest. In the quiet, memories clashed with doubts. Yet, even as tears threatened to overwhelm me, I held back, knowing that true strength grew not in outbursts but in the steady forging of resolve. My heart memorized pain and disappointment, but it also rehearsed the quiet courage whispered by my late husband's words. I reminded myself that vengeance, my silent revenge, would not be a tempest but a slow and deliberate storm. There was no need to confront Jeremy publicly, no benefit in shouting back in the same venom he had sprayed at me. Instead, I would gather the quiet stars of evidence and strategy, each a beacon illuminating the path to justice. In these moments of solitude, I nurtured the roots of fortitude. Though the scars of betrayal burned beneath my skin, I felt the stirring of a power unbroken. Patience was not weakness. Silence was not surrender. They were the weapons I would wield until the day justice was served, a justice not defined by loud proclamations, but by undeniable truth. And so, in the silence of my soul, I made my decision. I would no longer be the woman undermined by her own son's lies. I would move forward with quiet dignity, letting every act speak louder than any accusation he had made against me. This choice marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lessons of the past would build the foundation for my strength, where every memory, every tear, and every silent breath became part of a powerful, unspoken declaration. I deserve truth. I deserve respect. I deserve justice. And I would have it all borne in silence. The first step was to reach out to Harold, a man who had been more than a lawyer to me. He was a steadfast lighthouse during the stormiest chapters of my life. When I dialed his number, the familiar ring stirred a complex mixture of hope and anxiety in my chest. The moment he answered, his voice was steady, a reassuring constant amid the chaos Jeremy had unleashed. I arranged to meet him discreetly, knowing the importance of discretion in these delicate matters. His office was a quiet retreat, lined with shelves heavy with law books and family photographs, silent testaments, 2 years woven with wisdom and trust. Sitting across from him, I felt the old warmth of an alliance forged through time. I slid a folder across the polished wood, its contents carefully curated pieces of my unfolding story, documents, bank statements, and notes that hinted at discrepancies I had begun to uncover. Harold studied the papers attentively, his brow furrowed not with doubt but concern. "They have been weaving a tangled web," he said quietly, flipping through property deeds and account statements with precise care. "It's clear Jeremy and Margaret have been maneuvering to isolate you from your own assets, hiding behind legal smokescreens and family disputes to claim what isn't rightfully theirs. Together, we began to unravel the threads of deception. The more Harold and I delved into the labyrinth of financial records, the more apparent it became that Jeremy's public claims were part of a broader scheme, a calculated effort to seize control under the guise of caring for a mother deemed incapable. Yet, as Harold explained legal loopholes embedded in these carefully crafted claims, I realized that the law's nuances could serve me as well as them. Gathering evidence required a patient, almost surgical approach. I started compiling details methodically, the bank statements revealing unusual withdrawals, the property deeds bearing signatures I did not recognize, and the whispered affirmations of neighbors and friends who had witnessed subtle manipulations and strange meetings. Each piece was a lifeline, a small victory against the darkness cast by Jeremy and Margaret. Harold's guidance was invaluable. He advised caution and precision, emphasizing that every move I made had to be calculated to protect my dignity as much as my assets. "This is not just about money," he said with quiet gravity. "It's about your autonomy, your right to live your life on your terms. We must build a case founded on indisputable truth." We devised a strategy that was as much psychological as legal. I was not to engage Jeremy or Margaret directly, no confrontations, no fiery disputes that would feed their narrative of my supposed incompetence. Instead, I became the silent observer, gathering information beneath the surface, allowing the evidence to speak on my behalf when the time was right. Days blended into nights as I maintained my quiet vigil, punctuated only by whispered phone calls and discreet meetings with Harold. I masked my anguish with external calm, but the storm of betrayal roiled beneath. The deeper I plunged into the labyrinth of family conflict, the clearer my conviction became. Memories surfaced as I sifted through old photographs and documents. The house, our home, held its own testimony. Each corner whispered stories of laughter and tears, decisions made in the stillness of night after late arguments, and the dreams Jeremy and I once held sacred. Those memories became fuel for my resolve, reminding me that this fight was not merely for possessions but for my identity. Reaching out to Harriet, the family friend whose quiet presence had long offered me solace, was a crucial step. Over steaming cups of tea in her cozy kitchen, she recounted moments Jeremy and Margaret thought were hidden irregularities, whispered plans, and subtle but unmistakable shifts in Jeremy's demeanor. Her testimony was a vital thread, stitching together a fabric stronger than lies alone. Quiet conversations with bank clerks and distant acquaintances followed. Their observations of odd transactions and unusual behaviors added strokes of truth to the canvas I painted, undermining the false narrative Jeremy had spun. Increased with every piece of shared knowledge was my quiet courage, not one born of outcry but of measured determination. I began to see cracks in Jeremy's carefully built facade, the greed concealing insecurity, the lies supported by Margaret's calculated manipulations. Our meetings with Harold grew longer and more focused. We dissected documents, reviewed timelines, and rehearsed responses. Legal jargon, once daunting and obscure, evolved into an instrument of empowerment. I was not just reacting, I was anticipating, strategizing to reclaim control. The emotional cost was steep. Each discovery brought a fresh wave of pain, of betrayal and crushed hopes, but also the fierce satisfaction of unraveling deceit. I detailed not only facts but feelings, the raw emotions of myself and others, for these too were part of the story I would eventually unveil. Harold and I outlined legal avenues to challenge Jeremy's baseless claims and secure my future. Protection laws for the elderly, safeguards against undue influence and coercion all became part of our arsenal. Most important was establishing my full competence, supported by testimony from trusted friends, neighbors, and professionals who could affirm my clarity and independence. Throughout, I maintained my routines, tending the garden, managing the house with quiet efficiency as a statement of strength amid the chaos. The home, once a symbol of my nurturing, became a fortress of resistance. Jeremy and Margaret, blind to the storm I quietly amassed, moved with brazen confidence. Their arrogance were fuel to my resolve. I avoided confrontation, understanding that silence fortified my power. Evenings found me by the window, moonlight bathing the garden where roses stubbornly bloomed, a testament to endurance. My late husband's quiet counsel echoed, and the woman I was becoming solidified. Pain lingered in shadows but no longer dominated. I was no longer a woman broken by betrayal. I was a force, building a future on patience, wisdom, and quiet strength. Each document, conversation, and testament layered a tapestry of undeniable justice, a justice born not of shouting but unassailable truth. My hands, once only planted seeds, now nurtured plans. The house transformed into a fortress, every room infused with the power of a mother reclaiming her dignity step by step. The reckoning would come not with cries or fury, but with the silent revelation of truth, the quiet roar of justice fulfilled after long patient waiting. And in that silence, I found not weakness, but an unbreakable strength, a strength born long ago from love and lived experience, ready to rise. The moment came quietly, nestled between ordinary days that blurred into one another like shades of gray. It was during one such routine day Jeremy and Margaret were away on one of their lengthy family trips, as they called them, leaving the house subdued, almost expectant. The absence stirred a strange calm inside me, a serene kind of urgency that propelled me forward. I began sorting through the personal belongings with a measured tenderness. Each item had a story, a fragment of the life I had built with my late husband and carved out for Jeremy. Old photographs faded by time, handwritten letters between us, the delicate china collected over decades. These relics carried memories that were both comforting and bittersweet. With a quiet resolve, I separated what I would keep from what needed to be let go, each choice a step toward reclaiming control. Selling a portion of the estate was the most symbolic move I made, a calculated decision woven with both practicality and silent defiance. There was the small cottage by the lake, once a sanctuary for warm family gatherings that had since become a financial burden. It held sentimental value, yes, but its sale was necessary. I arranged everything discreetly, timing the transaction so it would go unnoticed, a whisper beneath the grand noise of Jeremy's schemes. I remember the woman from the real estate office, her voice professional yet sympathetic as she handled the details. There was a mutual understanding between us, both women recognizing the gravity behind this quiet sale. It was a sacrifice but also a statement. I was still in control. The keys changed hands silently, but to me, it rang louder than any declaration. The act of disentangling myself from tangible remnants of my past life was not without its ache. As I packed away items, I allowed myself brief moments to linger in the memories they evoked: family dinners filled with laughter, quiet evenings reading by the fireside, celebrations of birthdays and holidays that once felt eternal. Each memory was a tender thread, pulling at my heartstrings but also fortifying my resolve. With each passing day, the house transformed from a home softened by years of shared happiness into a fortress of solitude and strategy. The warmth that once filled its walls dimmed into a steady glow of determination. I found myself meticulously planning the next step: secure the house, organize finances, prepare the final pieces for the confrontation that loomed ahead. The financial restructuring was painstaking. I moved accounts, shifted assets into secure holdings, and enlisted trusted professionals to ensure nothing could be touched or manipulated behind my back. These were steps taken in silence, their importance invisible to the untrained eye but critical to my defense. I was acutely aware of the stakes. Jeremy and Margaret believed they held all the power, blinded by their greed and assumption that I was weak, vulnerable. But the more I moved, the clearer it became that I was that rare person who could wield silence and patience like weapons. The less I reacted, the more their overconfidence grew, and with it, their chances of falling into the trap I was setting. The nights were my refuge. When the house settled into quiet and the world outside faded, I allowed my thoughts to wander through the labyrinth of what had been and what must be. I would sit in the dim light of the living room, hands folded as if in prayer, reminiscing on all the years of motherhood, the sacrifices of youth, the overwhelming sense of responsibility, the dreams quietly relinquished for Jeremy's sake. There was pain, of course. The sting of betrayal burned deeper with every recollection of the son I had cherished, now turned adversary. But beneath the surface, a well of steady strength rose. I was no longer drowning in sorrow. I was navigating a course guided by the wisdom of years and the clarity born of struggle. Each day brought new challenges, yet also victories, some small and unseen, others with the potential to shift the balance of power. I organized important papers, legal documents, bank statements, property titles, ensuring that every shred of paper was in order and accessible for the moment of reckoning. Despite all the careful planning, moments of doubt crept in, the quiet fears of what might be lost, the loneliness that settled in when faced with deception by one's own blood. But each time, I remembered my husband's words and held fast to the knowledge that this was a battle for dignity, not just assets. I felt the subtle shifts around the edges, the way neighbors gave me knowing looks, the kind and discreet inquiries from old friends. Their quiet support was a balm, a reminder I was not truly alone, even as Jeremy tried to alienate me from everything I held dear. The house, the garden, the very smallest details of my day-to-day life became part of the strategy. I tended plants with a surgeon's precision, each blossom a symbol of resilience and renewal. The garden grew wild in places but thrived where I had nurtured it, much like my own spirit. And then there was the legal team. I met regularly with Harold and others, refining every detail, anticipating every argument Jeremy might deploy. There was no room for error. I was acutely aware that any hint of weakness on my part could be exploited mercilessly. Yet, even as the pressure mounted, I maintained a facade of calm. I answered phone calls with measured patience, engaged in conversations with a quiet strength that belied the storm churning beneath. It was important that Jeremy and Margaret believed they had already won, that I was no match for their schemes. But beneath that calm veneer, the wheels were turning steadily and surely. I was reclaiming my life piece by piece, dismantling the structure Jeremy had hoped to inherit unchallenged. With every document secured, every asset protected, I could almost hear the faint cracking of their false confidence. My emotions remained my own secret. I allowed myself no outbursts, no displays that could be twisted into proof of instability. Instead, I held tightly to my dignity, knowing that the true power lay in the silent, deliberate building of my case. This was not simply a matter of money or possessions. It was about justice, respect, and reclaiming the narrative stolen from me. The quiet acts of this solitary battle, selling the cottage, securing finances, assembling evidence, were the strokes of a masterful painting I was constructing, one destined to reveal the truth and restore what was mine. I pictured the day ahead when I would no longer have to move in silence, when the truth would stand clear and undeniable. That vision, fragile yet fierce, propelled me forward during the long hours of preparation. As I locked the door one evening, the weight of what I had accomplished settled around me like armor. The house no longer felt like a place of loss, but a stronghold of survival and hope. The silent revenge I had sworn was unfolding with the careful precision only a mother's love and patience could wield. And in that stillness, amidst the quiet turning of pages and handling of papers, I found a profound peace. I was no longer a victim but the architect of my own justice, a woman transformed by betrayal into a force of unyielding strength. The family meeting was called suddenly, almost as if Jeremy wanted to display his triumph publicly and seal his claim over what he falsely believed was his by right. Even before I stepped through the door, I could feel the thick air of arrogance hanging in the room. Jeremy's confident laugh bounced off the walls, sharp and biting, while Margaret's polished smile was a mask hiding a deeper calculation. They both believed the gathering was the final act, the moment they would strip away my dignity, home, and assets with the support of friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. As I entered, a wave of calm washed over me. I walked steadily, controlling every step, every breath. The room, our once warm and familiar space, had transformed into an arena cloaked with tension. The eyes of those gathered flicked toward me, some curious, others cautious, and some filled with doubt or sympathy. I met several gazes with a steady, unyielding confidence, sending a silent message. The narrative Jeremy had constructed was far from complete. Jeremy began with practiced ease, his voice loud and brash, accusing me of mental incapacity and irresponsibility. His words were sharp darts aimed to silence and dominate. Margaret nodded approvingly, her eyes never leaving mine, daring me to challenge their version of reality. But I did not waver. Instead, the silence stretched just long enough for the weight of my presence to resonate. Then I spoke, my voice clear, steady, and unwavering. I am neither incompetent nor powerless. These accusations are lies, carefully spun to justify greed and selfish ambition. I saw their smiles falter almost immediately, the smugness dissolving into unease. Whispers spread across the room like a tide shifting beneath the surface. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide with a dawning realization, a story they thought they knew was unraveling. From my bag, I pulled a thick folder, carefully assembled over weeks of painstaking effort. It contained the evidence I had gathered: the bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals, the property deeds bearing signatures I did not authorize, affidavits affirming my mental clarity and independence, and testimonies from trusted friends and neighbors. I laid the documents on the table with deliberate reverence, letting the weight of truth resonate in every corner. Beside me, Harold stepped forward, his voice calm yet authoritative as he detailed the legal findings. He explained the machinations Jeremy and Margaret had hidden behind schemes designed to isolate me, inflate my supposed incapacity, and wrest control. Each word dismantled their carefully constructed facade, replacing lies with undeniable facts. Jeremy's face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief, his confident facade crumbling before the evidence. Margaret's composed mask flickered for a fleeting second before she forced an uneasy smile. But beneath that veneer, I glimpsed the seeds of panic. I continued speaking, each word cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. I have taken the necessary measures to protect what is mine, not out of greed, but to preserve my dignity, my legacy, and my right to live freely on my terms. Your conspiracy ends here. The silence that followed was profound and heavy, stretched thin like a strained rope waiting to snap. Jeremy searched for words, but his defiance faltered. Margaret's eyes flashed with bitter defeat. Meanwhile, the neighbors exchanged looks of amazement and newfound respect. The whispers of doubt had transformed into murmurs of support. In that charged moment, I reclaimed more than possessions. I reclaimed control over the story of my life, the foundation on which I'd built decades of love and sacrifice. The quiet strength I had nurtured in solitude now filled the room like a presence, overwhelming the hollow noise of deceit. Jeremy tried to argue, his voice losing its earlier conviction. Margaret's cruel smiles faded into forced grimaces. Their greed and entitlement were no match for the quiet force of truth laid bare. I stood firm and silent, letting the undeniable facts speak for themselves. This was the climax of a battle waged not in anger but in calm, unwavering resilience. The power of a mother's love, patient and methodical, now belonged unmistakably to me. As the meeting dissolved, Jeremy and Margaret retreated humbled and stripped of their false confidence. I watched them go without bitterness, only a solemn peace that comes from standing truthfully at the end of a long trial. In the days that followed, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Neighbors softened, their gestures subtle but sincere. Quiet acts of kindness trickled gently back into the home. The house itself seemed to breathe easier. The heaviness of conflict lifted, replaced by a cautious yet hopeful tranquility. The foundation of trust, though fragile, began to heal. My dignity, once threatened with erasure, shone quietly in every corner, an unbroken light in the rooms I had fought so hard to save. And amid the stillness, a deep understanding rooted itself gently within me. Revenge need not roar to be felt. Sometimes, it is the whispered power of preparation, patience, and undeniable truth. It is the steady unveiling of facts that no lie can overshadow. I had told the story no one wanted to hear, the tale of a mother's betrayal and her silent victory. And in that truth, I found freedom. I was no longer condemned by betrayal but liberated by justice. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with a quiet confidence born of knowing my strength and reclaiming my narrative. No louder announcement was necessary. The silence itself, now, was my triumph. The days after the confrontation unfolded with a newfound calm that felt almost surreal. Jeremy and Margaret retreated, their presence shrinking like a shadow fading at dusk. The house, once heavy with tension and unspoken conflicts, began to breathe a lighter air. It was as if the walls themselves exhaled, releasing years of silent suffering and suspicion. I moved through the rooms differently now. Steps grew lighter as if the burden that had weighed me down was lifting inch by inch. The home I had built, piece by piece, through decades of love and sacrifice, was no longer marred by betrayal. Instead, it shimmered with the quiet radiance of resilience and restoration. The garden outside, which I had neglected for too long, called out to me once more. I found solace on my knees among the soil, fingers tracing new paths as I planted seeds I hoped would take root and grow. The roses bloomed stubbornly, their delicate petals defying the seasons, much like my own spirit. Each seed I planted was a promise, a renewed commitment to nurture life and hope, even after everything I had endured. This simple act of tending to the earth became a daily meditation. The sun warmed my face, the scent of fresh soil mingled with the sweet aroma of jasmine wafting through the window. It reminded me that healing was a slow, organic process, growth born not in the absence of pain, but alongside it. The legal battles that had once threatened to consume me retreated into the background, a quiet hum beneath the peaceful rhythm of daily life. Harold remained a steadfast ally, his calm reassurances and steady presence reminding me that the foundations I had rebuilt were solid. The documents, the testimonies, the truth I had fought so hard to reveal now stood as protective pillars around my future. In quiet moments, I reflected on the tumultuous journey, the heartbreak, the The whispered battles, the silent victories. The tears that once threatened to overwhelm me had dried into something stronger, acceptance woven tightly with quiet strength. I realized that true resilience isn't forged in moments of rage or despair, but in the patient persistence to stand firm when the world seems intent on breaking you. The neighbors, too, seemed transformed. Their cautious glances softened into genuine smiles, small gestures of kindness threading together the bonds that had frayed under the weight of suspicion. A basket of fresh bread left on my doorstep, friendly offers to tend the garden when I was away, warm greetings exchanged over the fence, they were quiet acknowledgments of respect and solidarity. One afternoon, as the golden light of dusk spilled across the lawn, I watched children playing nearby, their laughter a balm to the soul. Their innocence and joy reminded me that life moves forward, carrying with it the seeds of renewal and hope even after the deepest wounds. Thoughts of Jeremy no longer consumed me with anger, but swirled with a gentle sorrow for the son I had loved and the man he had become. The betrayal had cut deep, but I chose to release the bitterness, not to absolve him, but to free myself. Holding on to resentment would only perpetuate my own pain, while letting go allowed space for healing. In the tranquil evenings, I would sit on the porch, the breeze carrying the mingled scents of jasmine and fresh earth. There, in the fading twilight, I felt the full measure of my journey, the heartbreak, the fight, and the quiet triumph born of patience and perseverance. I had been broken, yes, but never defeated. My story was no longer one of loss or victimhood, but of recovery and self-empowerment. I had chosen to live life on my own terms, with grace, strength, and an unwavering commitment to my own worth. In the deep stillness that settled within me, I discovered a profound truth. Silence can be the loudest voice. It is the quiet strength that refuses to be diminished, the steady resolve that outlasts betrayal and deceit. In silence, I found my liberation. I was no longer merely surviving, I was truly living.